Alrighty, I got that horn epoxied in. I used 5 minutes. I use this stuff. The Bob Smith Industries 5 minute epoxy. Buddy, you better work fast, because in 5 minutes that shit's hard. It sets up fast. So you're probably better off using 15. It's better piece of wire. Make sure you get the epoxy poked down into that hole. See if I can get this. There we go. Make sure you get the epoxy down inside the hole that horn goes into. And ideally when you push that in, you'll see it squirting out. That's a little bit loose, which is perfect. The epoxy will take up the space. That's one of the ideal things about epoxy. It is a gap filler. So I'm probably going to iron up this covering and I'll epoxy that horn in. A little something to keep in mind when you're deciding which end is up on your flying surfaces. Like, I'll look and see where the fold over is on the covering, where it comes around on the top, and the seam. I always have the seam on the bottom. Now once you decide that, I mark top and bottom. Now with your horizontal stab and elevator, unlike the wing, your horn faces down. So you want your stab upside down when you glue your horn in and you get everything set up to dry flush with your trailing edge. So this one, horns up, everything's facing upright. Stab, you want everything upside down so your horn's facing down. Just a little potential boo-boo there. Hey, it's flap hinging time. Like I said before, toss the CA, marking up the spacing for the Dubro hinges. What I'm doing now is I got a old X-Acto out carefully. I thought that was a sharp blade, but it doesn't seem to be doing that great. Is carefully cutting about a 45-degree notch in there. And a lot of the times you see them, they just cut the whole thing out square. You can do that, but I find this way it helps hide that hinge a little lot better. I always try to get one corner in there first and get her going, and that way you don't have this thing dancing all over your control surface. Of course you want to get her in 90 degrees. This thing's got a switch issue I gotta fix. I got a bit of a race going here. I thought I used 30-minute epoxy. Turns out I used 12-minute epoxy, so I'm running out of time to get these hinges in here. Not that it's a terrible big deal, but I like to get the wing hinged. And I'm using my usual straw method. Fill the straw full of epoxy, suck it into the straw, stick the straw in the hinge slot, squeeze it in. Especially with this ARF, because man, they must have thought their hinges were 6 inches wide or something, as I tell you. They're put quite a slice in them, and it's totally unnecessary. Yeah. I think I'm just going to make it here. The stuff's getting thick, but it's not quite there. And then once I get them in, I'll flip the wing around so the epoxy runs towards the hinge. So leading edge is open inside. So when it goes in so deep, and the epoxy will run back and form around the hinge itself. And I kind of got to cut my pants down on this one. But this is the easiest way in the world to apply epoxy to dubros. I'm doing hinge slots. I always keep these little squares cut up and I soak them with alcohol, keeping everything clean. It's a little trick I got from, I think it was Top Fight Kits and ARFs. They'll tell you to chop up those little squares of paper towel. Unbelievable how long they thought. The Chinese guy got way carried away with his slot machine. And one more hinge. Dum Dum didn't even oil his hinges, so I just got way caught way out of my pants down on this. Door on the fly. And I put a little coat of epoxy on the hinge before I show it in there. Yeah, she's starting to set up on me. Thankfully, this is the last one. Oiling those hinges is a must. If you don't, you're gonna, and I flex them. You have to flex them to get the oil to actually work into the hinge joint. And the epoxy will harden long before it ever wicks its way down the plastic. There. I always put my hinges 90 degrees. That makes it easy to see whether or not they're all the same. And it almost guarantees you they're going to be flat. Get this flipped around while the epoxy still has a tendency to want to run instead of just there. Okay, the epoxy's all set up. I've gone through it now and just freed up my hinges. This is the time to start looking for those epoxy fingerprints. And I'm finding a couple here. And start rubbing them off. Because once it's hard, you're stuck with it. But before it fully sets, you can still get them off. So yeah, I'm finding quite a few here actually. And even though it's monocoat or plastic film, that stuff will still stick to it and you will not, probably will not get it off. I haven't had much success getting the stuff off when I miss. And it doesn't hurt to fold over. This thing is so you're not just smearing around what you already got. Plus I'm getting rid of my, oh there's a real good track there. You can see that. It's hard to tell if you can see it or not. See a little light on there. There it is. Don't know if you can see it. Probably. You can't tell until you get up on the screen, but it's slowly coming off. It's an actual bead of epoxy that got on there off the hinge. You need more alcohol. What's a fella say that on Friday night? I need more alcohol. Yeah, as long as it's a little bit tacky, if you scrub at it, you'll get it off. Yeah, a little tiny bit more there. Gone. Good. Now, I don't know if you could see it during the video or not. See how long? For some reason, they really went to town. Like some of those slits. Like 2.5 inches long. So while I have my straw in there, I'd work it into that slit, and you'd get epoxy in there. And when I pulled it out, of course, it would squeeze, and I could see some of the epoxy coming out of the extreme slot, we'll call it, which is good, and that means the glue actually got into the joint. This is kind of an often overlooked and rather important part of assembling an ARF, or any other model for that matter, especially where you have an option to correct by any tweaks that might be in your wing. So at the base, like close to where the sheeting ends here, I got this lined up. I got my incidence meters on here. And I want to check the wing for any warps before I put the flaps on. After you put the flaps on, you're shit out of luck. And it's a good thing I checked, because there is a -1 degree tweak in that wing. So I'll have to give it a little twist, re-shrink the covering, and fix that right up. These two reading 0 now. I had to give it quite a twist. There's a pretty decent wrinkle in there that I had to iron out. Get that wing straight. So that's the outboard wing panel. I had that tweak in it. We'll see how I make out with the inboard now. Of course, once you're done ironing everything tight, give it that one last check. Just make sure. And she's as straight as an arrow now. As you can see, I'm fitting the belly pan to the bottom of putting the bottom of the fuse back in. And as usual, you never get that curve perfectly fitting the airfoil. So just took a piece of 16th balsa and I'm just gluing in strips as I need them to fill that gap. And as you can see, I got a piece of balsa glued in here. There's triangle stock and ply and two between the battery tray and a 1/4 inch landing gear mount. There's lots for the epoxy to bite on the front. I see people gluing these together and there's monocoat in the glue joint. You got to get that out. Like when I glued that wing on, it's balsa to balsa everywhere, and I did not spare the epoxy. The ARF wing does have a strip on the top. They don't have one on the bottom. So what I'm doing here, plus I put this piece in the middle, is this is actually going to help the structure. So this will be a good strong joint on the fuselage, and it's going to have a good strong bond to that wing when I remove the covering. And speaking of removing covering, I bought this interesting looking creature. It's a Hobbico soldering iron, but it comes with an X-Acto knife blade in it, and it has a soldering tip as well. It's a cast ass for cutting monocoat out of the way for your glue joints. If you're using a knife to remove the monocoat, you risk scoring the wood and making that area weaker. Using a sharp tip on one of these soldering iron works, but it leaves a rough cut. It leaves a rough edge. So I saw this thing on Great Hobby's website, so I ordered one in. And I'll tell you, literally goes through that plastic film like hot knife through butter. Doesn't leave that jagged edge that the large tip, you know, even though it doesn't matter how sharp you get it, it leaves quite a rough edge on the soldering tip, and you're not cutting into the balsa at all. So that's the awesome combination of both worlds. Anyway, getting back to the airplane, I got this cutaway here. Let's allow cooling air to go through the engine, or the motor and the battery, and the electronic speed controller. Because there's a gap here, you can watch previous videos, you'll see it clearly. I open the front up, and I put holes in this pan just to give an extra spot for hot air to get out, or warm air to get out. Hot air, watching too many politicians, I guess. This brass tube is what I use to punch the hole. You can just take the back of your X-Acto knife and sharpen a taper in there, and all you do is, you can put it in the drill press, or you can just, all I do is roll it with my fingers and press it on. I cut it out pretty quick, and it works great. So now, I got this air outlet just in case it's not enough. The air has an extra spot now to go through out the bottom here. So just because of that, I'm probably going to leave the monocoat, or the covering, in the middle here. I don't know yet, because really, if anybody looks underneath and says, hey, it's bare wood in there. Anyway, I'm going to finish decking around with this and get these gaps filled up, and I'm going to cut the covering out of the way, and epoxy this thing on. The instructions for the ARF say to CA your wing and everything in. I wouldn't. The epoxy is an awesome gap filler. It's strong, and especially holding the wing on for the amount of force that's going to be on that thing, I'd use epoxy. I used 30 minutes to put the wing in. Even 12 minutes, but I like the 30 minute, gives me time to tweak it.